So maybe you find yourself in a situation where you just can't seem to stop thinking about somebody, even though they pull away. And even though consciously, you know this person isn't treating you the way that you actually deserve. Well, have you ever wondered why you feel stuck obsessing over somebody who's emotionally unavailable and not showing up for you? Because it's painful when you're hooked on the idea of somebody, and yet that person keeps you at arm's length. So, without understanding the core concepts that we're going to cover in this video here today, you may find yourself in a cycle of just feeling like you are in longing, hoping, waiting to see what's going to happen, and unable to move on. And you may even find that this is extremely disruptive to your life. So, in today's video, we're going to go through these psychological reasons behind limerence, which, if you're not familiar with this concept, limerence is like obsessive infatuation, but the big differentiator between limerence and non-limerence, things like just a crush or some romantic feelings, are that limerence causes you to abandon yourself, number one, okay? Like literally, you do things and you show up for relationships that you know are not right for you. So that would be a form of you abandoning yourself, right? Or you know this person doesn't even have the traits or qualities that you are looking for in a partner, and yet you keep going back to this person anyways. That's a form of self-abandonment, right? Because you are abandoning your truth. And number two, a lot of times when we're in limerence, which is this like obsessive infatuation at the expense of self, we're forming a lot of our bond with the idea of a person rather than with how the person is actually showing up. So we're more connected to this idea than we are to the actual person. So we're going to talk about the psychological reasons why this happens and how to break free from this kind of obsessiveness with somebody who may not be giving you the love, attention, or connection that you really deserve. So if you're new to this channel, my name is Gibson. I'm really happy you're here. I hope if you enjoy this video today, you'll subscribe and come back. And I put daily content out here all about attachment styles, dating, relationships, and really the psychology of these things because I've been working in this field for 10 plus years and love sharing this material. So basically, as I mentioned, we fall into limerence with different individuals, okay? And there are actually psychological reasons as to why. There's going to be three major things that we're going to cover here. But when you look at what limerence is, because there's this obsessive infatuation, and it's often more with the idea of somebody than the person themselves, and also, you're often in a dynamic where this obsessive infatuation causes you to go against your own truth, your own authenticity, sometimes even your own morals and values and boundaries. Sometimes you even agree to do things that you don't actually want to do just because you're trying to get closer to this person, just because you're trying to people please your way towards somebody. And when this happens, it actually causes your self-esteem to take a hit because it doesn't do well or bode well for us to go against our truth. That's a great way to wear away at your own self-esteem. So there's three underlying reasons why this is actually happening, and we're going to talk about what you can do about them. Reason number one is that when we are hungering for something, okay, and it's usually around a need. So when we are hungering for something, we want somebody to make us feel seen or heard or important or validated or reassured or protected or encouraged. When we have these needs, these deep needs that we're hungering for, sometimes our mind will prioritize these needs over our own truth. Think of it this way. It's almost like your subconscious mind, which by the way is responsible for 95%+ of your behaviors. Your subconscious mind will end up in a situation where it's like, you know what? I would rather take the pain of betraying my truth and going against myself than I would the pain of not having this need met, to be seen or to be validated or to be made important or whatever. You can fill in the blanks. The way you'll know, by the way, what need it is it'll be the things you see happening in your fantasy. I'll take you through an exercise for that in a second. But we obsess over this need so much because we're starving for it that we pick the pain of betraying ourselves or the pain of not having that need. Now, here's how we find out what the need actually is, okay? I want you to think about when you obsess over somebody or when you find yourself like constantly thinking about them. I want you to think about in those moments, what are you actually imagining happens? Because if you look closely, what's happening in those imaginary fantasies with this person involved usually are the needs that you're seeking. So, for example, I would see a lot of times people would be like, oh, I imagine in my fantasy world with this person I'm in limerence with that they see me doing something that I'm good at and they see that I'm capable, or they see that I'm strong or competent or good enough. or they validate me, or they think I'm special. Okay. Those are your needs. Those are the needs you're starving for. Whatever needs are happening in your fantasy world are the needs you're starving for. And that tells you a lot. And we're going to unpack this in just a second in point number 2. But that's the first thing I want you to look at. The main needs that people will fall into limerence with are if somebody seems like they are making them feel special, validated, encouraged, important, deeply connected, seen, if somebody makes you feel really understood or like they really know you, protected, like somebody has your back or they're looking out for you. Like these are the types of needs I often see people go completely into limerence for or with. And here's the kicker. Here's the craziest part. Sometimes the person's not even really meeting those needs much in reality. It's just that like there's something about them that you're like projecting into the fantasy that they may do that in the fantasy world or may in the future show up for these needs. So it brings me to point number 2, which is the understanding that your mind, when it can't get its needs met in the present, will fracture off and break off into the fantasy world or go into memories of the past as a way to get those needs met. In other words, you may find yourself actually like imagining in the future or in the fantasy world. And what happens is have you ever noticed when you're in that fantasy world that you actually feel good? It actually elicits emotional and neurochemical reactions. Yeah, that's how this works. So what happens is your mind is starving for needs. It feels like you can't get your needs met in the present. So you go off into the fantasy and imagine with somebody else that you'll get these needs met. And that fantasy causes you to have a skewed version of a person where you're dating their potential instead of their truth. And then you find yourself self-abandoning for this fantasy where you're not even dating the person in the reality, in the real world. It's just the fantasy of them. So what does this actually tell us in point number 2 here? It tells us that you are starving for those needs and you don't know how to meet them in the relationship to yourself. If you did, if you knew how to have your tank half full, I give this analogy a lot, but imagine you go to a gas station and you're driving to the gas station and your tank is fully empty and you pull into the gas station, you're like, oh my God, I need the gas station to be open. But imagine instead, if you go in and your tank's half full, you're like, oh, gas station's not open. It's fine. I'll go to the next one. It's an inconvenience. It's annoying. It's not ideal, but you're not like in panic and desperation. And so what happens is when we don't know how to meet our own needs, we will do all sorts of things. We will do backflips. We will bend over backwards just to try to attach to somebody who will meet them for us because we're starving. And so what you actually need to learn to do is meet the needs in the relationship to yourself on a daily basis. It doesn't feel good at first. For the first 21 days is how long it actually takes to build new neural networks where we pattern things in. Another analogy for you around this is like, remember when you first learned to drive a car or ride a bike? Then you have to think about it. You're like, oh my gosh, turn on the signal. Oh my gosh, look in the rearview mirror, look in the side mirrors. And there's so many things you have to remember, and it's kind of stressful and it doesn't feel good. It's because it's conscious. Okay. Your conscious mind is responsible for 3 to 5% of your beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. Once things are subconscious, they feel natural. So then think about, oh, once you started driving and you drove every day for 21 days, well, you patterned in your ability to drive. And then you get in the car and you can turn the radio station, you can turn on the podcast. You may even be off in thought while you're driving, thinking about, tomorrow when you missed your exit, because it was just so much easier to drive once it became patterned in, once it became habitual. And so we have to actually be able to extract that and replicate that out. In other words, we have to be able to make meeting our needs habitual because then it will feel easy and you'll feel like you're self-soothing more normally. So that's point number 2. Point number 3, okay? This is an exercise for you, okay? By the way, I will tell you this exercise I think will be really eye-opening. Like often people are very surprised by this. But I will tell you, if you actually want to do deeper work on this and like really move the needle fast, we have a full 14-day trial to all of the personal development school. And there's a course about limerence, how to actually rewire limerence. If this is something that's causing you to stay with people who are not supporting the highest expression of yourself or what you're looking for in relationships, but you can't seem to actually leave, this is a great course to work on. And within the 14-day free trial, there's all of your attachment courses for the 5 key pillars. There's kind of a 6, but there's 5 things you need to do to rewire your attachment style to become securely attached. And that's all laid out for you on your dashboard in order of the courses. Plus, we have like daily webinars and one-to-one support in a group setting. You can come in, you can ask me questions. Like there's all kinds of support in there. So anyways, so this is an exercise to do that can be very helpful. I want to ask you, okay, to sit down for 5 minutes. And this can be now, this can be, you can pause this and come back to this later. You can even just think about it if you're like in your car or doing something at this moment and can't do this. But I want you to think for a couple of minutes about what you really want in an ideal partner. Okay, so let's call this your standards, the things that are really important to you. These would be things like somebody who's consistent, who knows how to work through conflict, who makes me feel seen and cared for and loved, who wants to invest in the relationship, who wants to grow with me, who is willing to step up and be accountable for their behaviors, who makes me feel safe, who makes me feel really connected. So I want you to think of these things and think of a few of them. Okay, and then I want you to write a column next to those things. So let's say you listed those off and there's 5 or 6 of them. In the column next to those 5 or 6 things, I want you to score, like from 1 to 10, how much the person you're in limerence with is actually meeting your standards. And 10 being like they just knock it out of the park, 1 or 0 being like not really at all. And sometimes you'll see just how eye-opening this is because you'll sit down and realize, oh my gosh, I'm completely infatuating with somebody who's literally not meeting any of the things that are really important to me. And that can be this wake up call that, wait, my standards are not even being met. And it brings us to reality instead of trying to connect to the person in the fantasy. And sometimes when we see reality for what it is, it helps us move the needle and be able to walk away. And I'm going to add one last bonus piece of information here. If you have a huge wound, a huge fear of being alone or abandoned, then sometimes again, we'll pick the lesser of two evils. We'll be in a situation where we're like, I'd rather, stay with somebody and, not have to deal with how, painful that fear of abandonment is, than leave, even though I know it's not working, and feel that fear of abandonment that I have come to life. And so sometimes you stay in things out of fear instead of out of truth. But I want you to know that you can rewire those core fears as well. That's also in the 14-day free trial, like how to actually rewire your painful core wounds or limiting beliefs. So really important. I hope this was informational or supportive for you today. If you have questions about limerence, let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, come back, hang out here, please subscribe, and thank you for watching. I'm so glad you stopped by, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.